That behavioral shift is going to break the cycle and get you to spiral rather than cycle. Cycles is just repetitive and life gets monotonous, life gets boring, and then we end up hating it. But the moment we do something differently, we step aside, it's no longer a cycle, it's a spiral. I'd like to start off with a story. This is one of those stories where I already started, so it's too late. There's no going back, but maybe I shouldn't be sharing because I'm going to get myself out of a job. Too late, right? About 10 years ago, I found myself in Brooklyn, New York. I was working as a dorm counselor in a yeshiva. Big bucks, right? And I'm 21 years old, and I'm responsible for a bunch of 18, 19-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. And one day, there was two of us, double trouble. One day, the yeshiva was going on a Shabbaton getaway weekend to Morristown, New Jersey. And my other buddy, who was working as my co-dorm counselor, was going to be going with them, which means I have the Shabbos off. I get to do what I want. I get to stay home and be away from that responsibility. I was looking forward to that. This was a summer Shabbos, so it was rather late. So there was a lot of time. It's about 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I see my co-dorm counselor in the dormitory. He's in bed. I said, "What's going on?" He says, "I'm not feeling well." And the first thing that rushes to my mind is, "Oh, who's taking you over?" He says, "I don't know." And I'm thinking that means it's probably me. So you know what you do when you have a responsibility, but you weren't formally asked to take that responsibility, you avoid, right? Make sure the principal doesn't see you, because if he sees me, he's going to ask me and I'm going to have to take on that responsibility. But if he doesn't see me and he doesn't ask me, never going to happen. We're going to be okay. So I'm in the yeshiva. I have to get something. I see the Rosh Yeshiva coming, the principal coming, and I'm like, okay, hide the corner. I can't get around. So I just walk past him. Don't make eye contact. Don't make eye contact. Don't make eye contact. I pass by. Yes, made it. I made it clear. I'm in the clear. I'm good for Shabbos. He'll have to figure it out. And then I hear my name being called. Josh. Oh, gosh. I turn around. Yes, Rabbi, how can I help you? He says, your buddy is sick. Unfortunately, he's not going to make it to the Shabbaton. We're just leaving in a couple of hours. Can you fill his place? Can you take him over and be with all these young boys for Shabbos, be the chaperone? And I'm feeling very conflicted inside because I don't want to do this. It is the responsible thing to do. I looked at him and I said, if you want me to, I will come. This man was a brilliant educator. Because you know what he says to me? He says, I don't want you to come. I want you to want to come. Why don't you get back to me in an hour? Right? He bounced the ball back in my court. I will never forget that line. I don't want you to come. I want you to want to come. I ended up coming and not wanting to be. No, I'm kidding. By the way, these are the people watching your kids, so be careful when you send them to yeshiva. Like the guys running away from responsibility. This was a brilliant, teachable moment that I will remember for the rest of my life. Because in our lives, we have responsibilities. We have those things we know we should be doing. We have our ideal selves. And then we have where we want what we want to be doing. And if Mashiach were here, or if we were tzaddikim, these two spaces in our existence would be very much aligned. And we'd feel great about ourselves. But that's not the reality. The reality is we have an inner tension very often in life between what we want and what we should be doing, what our responsibilities are. I'll tell you a great story. In the year 1906, Rabbi Shalom Dov Ber Lubavitch, known as the Rebbe Rashab, found himself in Austria, and he was ill. So he went to this is the way the story is recorded. When I read the original, he went to the famous professor of Vienna. Who is the famous professor of Vienna in 1906? Anybody know? If you do know, you could put it on the comment section. It was Sigmund Freud. He goes to Sigmund Freud for treatment. It's unclear what type of treatment or health issues they were. Sigmund Freud is the father of psychology. I don't know if he was formally practicing psychology. He was a neurologist and had other medical skill sets, and I don't know if psychology was fully developed at this point. Sigmund Freud is interviewing Rabbi Shalom Dovber of Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab. He's interviewing him and asking him about what his day is like, what his schedule is like. And apparently, a big chunk of his schedule was dedicated to learning Hasidus, to learning Hasidic teaching. It was dedicated to teaching Hasidus. And Freud was Jewish. Freud was not exposed to the world of Hasidus. He wasn't exposed to the world of the Baal Shem Tov and to the approach of Judaism with a smile and Judaism with heart and soul. If he was, maybe he wouldn't have left. There's an article about that Freud had written describing how he worked so hard to escape his Judaism. And he says, at the end of the day, I feel so Jewish. There's nothing I can do about it. He says, I don't know what's going on here. But Freud says, I've never been exposed to this part of Judaism. He says, what is it? And the Rebbe Rashab sees over here a golden opportunity to share what Hasidus is from the like with an elevator pitch. You know, you can't give a whole shiur, you can't give a whole class, and it's deep and it's. But he had to condense what the main point is in a way that's going to be meaningful to Sigmund Freud. So what did the Rebbe Rashab tell him? He says, our mind wants to do what is correct. Our heart wants to do what is comfortable. They're pulling us in separate directions. And Hasidus is a methodology by which we can align the heart and mind so that our heart, which is our passion, is pulling us in the direction of that which is true. And our mind, which is just the raw truth, is following or leading our passions, right? Aligning the two, aligning that inner tension. Freud says to him, impossible. The mind and heart are two separate things. You cannot unite them. They're two different worlds. To which the Rebbe Rashab responded, yes, they are two different worlds. And we have the opportunity and the responsibility to bridge them. I don't know what Freud was thinking. Like, you're just going to suffer with tension for the rest of your life. I don't know. I don't know what he. It could be for that reason. A lot of Freud's, although Freud is the father of psychology, in practice, many of his theories are outdated and rejected. The Rebbe Rashab told him it's our responsibility to bridge the mind and heart, to bridge these two worlds. And if we cannot bridge them, at least have a telephone wire where there can be some sort of communication. This was 1906. It was the late 1800s when Alexander Graham Bell came out with the telephone. Most people probably didn't have telephones because who are you going to call, right? But the concept served as a powerful message. But what we see here again is this tension. And we all face this tension. Unless you're a perfect tzaddik. We all face this tension between this gap between how I feel, my comfort zone, and where I should be, my ideal self, right? My mind and my heart, or my body and my soul, however you want to articulate it, right? But there is some sort of internal gap and internal tension, and it's tough. It's tough for those of you who have young children. I have young children, whenever I talk about parenting, I not talk about parenting or just talk, whenever it comes up, all the parents with older children say, just wait, man. You think it's getting easier. But I think of that as an example. It requires a lot of patience, right? That's not where our heart always is, because life gets busy and it's tough and you lose patience, right? But that's where our mind is. We know that that's the right thing to do, right? I'm just using that as an example. Right? That'll apply in our marriage. It can apply in many, many different ways. I know I should be more respectful to my spouse. That's not the comfortable thing to do. That requires humility. I don't want to submit my heart. But how can I align my heart and my mind? I want you to take a moment and think about one area in your life where you're feeling this inner tension. You don't need to share it. This is private. This is just between you and God. Think about one moment, one area in life, and I'm sure we all have many areas in life where we have this inner tension. Think of one. Identify one area in life where we experience an inner tension between what should and what is, right? What I know and how I feel. Identify one area. And again, you don't need to put this on the chat. I don't need to know about it. It's just for you to know about. What I do want to know, if you're comfortable sharing, you could share it anonymously via the Q&A. if you'd like. Describe how that tension leaves you feeling with just 1 or 2 words. Keep it simple. With 1 or 2 words, describe how that tension leaves you feeling. So identify one area in life where you're experiencing that inner tension, that gap between the mind and heart, or the body and soul, and describe what that tension feels like with 1 or 2 words. Once you identify what that tension feels like, I'd appreciate it if you can put it either in the chat box or in the Q&A, whichever you're more comfortable with. I see over here hopeless. That's a great description, right? Anyone else? Any other descriptions? 1 or 2 word description. How does that tension leave us feeling? And again, if you want to do it in the Q&A, lost. Okay, good. Wandering. Okay. One of my favorite analogies is the rubber band analogy. Anybody familiar with the rubber band analogy? I was giving a class, a presentation on this 6 years ago, and I was bringing up the rubber band analogy, and I'm like, I wish I had a rubber band to actually show you. And one lady in the class says, I have a rubber band, and she pulls out a rubber band from her purse. I'm like, that's awesome. Have rubber band, will travel. So imagine you have a rubber band, right? And one end of the rubber band represents the ideal, your ideal self, the truth that you know. The other side represents your feelings, right? Your internal self, your external self, the ultimate truth, but what is. And the more I act on what I feel, the more tension I'm going to experience, because that truth is gnawing at me, right? The rubber band's being pulled. Okay, so you'll say, well, then just do the right thing. I'm also going to feel tension, right? What I need to do is get the entire rubber band to shift, to realign, to recalibrate inside, right? Let's see. I see another description over here. Sad and lonely. That's a great description. Hopeless, lost, wandering. Now, let me ask you, aggravated. Okay, good. Right? It feels aggravating to experience that type of tension. Very good. Now, I want you to think about what might happen if tomorrow morning you woke up and a miracle happened. Mashiach was here. Dream big. A miracle happened, and this tension is no longer there. You no longer experience this tension. You're aligned. The truth that you know in your mind, for some reason, my heart is just going along with it. I'm not even suppressing my heart. My heart is going along with it. I bought in. What is the first thing you would notice? 1 or 2 words, and please try to be as specific as possible. So you wake up tomorrow morning, and I'm a different person because that tension is gone, which means I'm realigned. What is the first thing about yourself you're going to notice? And if you could please feel comfortable sharing either publicly or anonymously with 1 or 2 words, what is the first thing you're going to notice were this tension to have been resolved? Right, I wake up in the morning and I'm like, my mind and heart are just on the same page. I'm passionate about my responsibilities. I don't resent my responsibilities. The first thing you're going to notice about yourself, it's most likely a feeling, right? How would you describe that feeling? Weightless and oriented. I love that, right? You're going to feel peaceful. Great. You're going to feel inner peace. You're going to feel a certain weight lifted off of you and like you can just move, right? The depressive feeling, and I use the word depression in the literal sense of the word, that feeling of something's holding me down and crunching me is gone. I'm going to feel more weightless. I'm going to feel peaceful, feeling lighter, clearer, at ease. Okay, these are all wonderful descriptions. Okay. We feel aligned, purposeful, I feel that my potential has been tapped into. Okay, these are excellent descriptions. Okay, this is where we're heading towards, right? We've just identified a goal. We want to feel more purposeful, more aligned. We don't want life weighing on us. We want to be passionate about life. We want life. We want to buy in. And what we need to do, and what I'm hoping to share with you are some tools on how to recalibrate, how to get our heart in the right space. I'm going to share with you a word that may be triggering to some of us. And I'm doing that not for the purpose of triggering you, but for the purpose of hopefully tearing down a preconceived notion and rebuilding. And that's the word teshuva. People like to preach teshuva, especially during Elul, right? What is teshuva? Become a better person. I read a teaching from the Alter Rebbe, and he says something fascinating. He says, how could you do teshuva, return to God? Aren't you already connected with God? Teshuva means return to God. Well, I am connected with God. Didn't you tell me I have a soul that's within me and that I'm... So he says, what is teshuva then? It's returning to yourself. It's that recalibration that we're talking about. Putting ourselves in the right space, which suggests, by the way, that the emotional gap that we're experiencing, that tension, is real from the perspective of our emotions. But deep down inside, it's not, it doesn't have to be there. Perceptually, it's there. In reality, it isn't there. And if we could learn to recalibrate, we could just align ourselves, everything could like fit into place. And he shares in this teaching a beautiful analogy. It's one of my favorite analogies, so I use it and abuse it because I just love it. He says, how many hours a day is the sun shining for? Trick question. How many of you are thinking 12 hours a day? The sun is shining for 24 hours a day. The sun is always shining. At nighttime, you won't see the sun shining, but does that mean it's not shining anymore? The sun is always shining. At nighttime, we won't see the sun shining. He says, your soul is always shining. Your lifeline, your connection to God, your connection to the infinite, your potential, your most ideal self that you believe in is shining all the time. It's there. And sometimes it gets dark. It's nighttime. And at nighttime, you could still see the sun, but it's reflected on the moon. Now, what happens if I don't see the sun being reflected on the moon? Does that mean the sun went away? Does that mean the moon went away? It just means the moon is in the wrong space. The moon has to orbit to the right space. It will finally reflect the light of the sun. Our heart has to move to the right space, and it will finally reflect the light of the soul. But to do that, you have to believe that that soul is there. Where I heard from, there was a famed mashpia educator. His name was Rabbi Shlomo Chaim Kesselman. This guy was he started as a teacher in the original Chabad yeshiva in the 20s, the 1920s, not the 2020s. And he was known, I was reading a biography about him. He was known as like just loved everybody. He really just loved everybody, cared about every single student. And he used to tell his students that we need to think about where I need to be, where I could be, where I am, and try to close the gaps between these. Where I need to be, I mean, that's pretty ambitious, but dream big. Then be honest with myself. Where could I be today or tomorrow? And how am I going to close that gap? How am I going to recalibrate? How am I going to put my heart in the same space as my soul? By the way, you'll love this. The word emunah, which we use to mean faith, right? Just have faith. Okay, great. Well, what does that mean? What do I do? Just believe. Well, how do I do that? The word emunah comes from the Hebrew word amon, oman, which means to train. It takes training. It takes work. The calibration takes work. It takes identifying that that soul is there, which, by the way, I whenever people talk about the soul, I get like, okay, here we go again, right? Cliche words that don't mean anything. Well, what is a soul? Because to me, when I hear the word soul, I think of Casper the Friendly Ghost, and that doesn't help me. What is a soul? I don't know. There's like this thing floating around me, and somehow, if I can identify it, it's going to make me a better person because of a. It just sounds so fake. I was listening to a speaker a little while ago, and he said something beautiful. And what he said, I'm not criticizing him or critiquing him. I'm just critiquing my own understanding. He said that as a speaker, you have to be careful not to let it get to your head, right? Especially if you're successful. And he says, I had to get to myself to this place where I don't need people's validity. I'm essentially valid because I have a soul that is united with God. And that meditation helped him. I'm not critiquing him, but I am critiquing myself. To me, what would that mean? To ourselves, what would that mean? If I wanted to be more friendly with my soul, what would that mean? What is this soul? It's an neshama. It's a breath of God. Okay, great. But what does that mean? These are all just physical descriptions of something that we're supposed to be best friends with or comfortable with and consistent with. And what is it? Okay, welcome to my head, spinning from the inside. I want to share with you just a couple of descriptions because I think this will help us unpack where we're trying to get. Going back to our descriptions, our dream, right? If we woke up tomorrow and a miracle happened and the tension was gone, we'd feel more peaceful. But that's going to result from the soul. We'd feel more aligned, purposeful. We'd feel like we tapped into our potential. I'm just rereading the comments, right? We'd feel lighter, clearer, at ease. To me, these are things that would flow from being more comfortable with the soul. But what is this soul? One description from the soul, and I go back to the earliest description of the soul that I could think of, or one of the earliest ones, which was from King Solomon in the book of Proverbs, in the book of Mishlei. Mishlei is an interesting book, by the way, interesting book in the Bible because there's no storyline. It's just like inspiring bumper stickers. But there is a lot to unpack. And he says, Ner Hashem nishmas Adam, the candle of Hashem is the soul of a person. A soul is like a flame. A soul is like a flame. Why is a soul like a flame? Because it's flickering. It's trying to get us somewhere. There's somewhere we want to be. There's somewhere we feel like we should be, right? That's what the flame says. You light a candle and it flickers. And that flame is essentially saying, hey, I shouldn't be here. I should be there. The soul is trying to get us to go somewhere. And by the way, where it's trying to get us might be uncomfortable for our hearts. We got to get our heart to buy in, which we'll talk about soon. You know what else a flame does? It gives light, clarity. The soul is clarity. If I felt more comfortable with my soul, maybe I'd have more clarity. One of the descriptions I had read from the Lubavitcher Rebbe about what the soul is, and he was describing this in context of just in general life and death. The soul is the part of you that's eternal. The body evolves. Even our heart and mind evolves, right? But there is a part of you that is very stable. Very stable. Part of you that just doesn't. If we dig deep down inside, and we'll talk about how to do that in a moment. Just don't worry. You'll find a part of you, the part of you that is most stable, the most stable part of you. Another way to put soul, and again, I'm just trying to put different language to something we already know about because I think it will make it more meaningful. The part of you that is most excited. What drives you? What gets you going? What gets you out of bed in the morning? If it's the iced coffee, I'm just being a little vulnerable here, with whipped cream and a ton of sugar, man. You can't start your day without iced coffee and whipped cream and sugar. That might be the animal soul, but it is a part of your soul, right? That's what you're excited about. 7-layer cake, right? If it's the wisdom you're going to learn, the Torah you're going to learn, the connection you're going to have through davening, the relationships you're going to work on, right? That might be your divine soul. That might be your godly soul. But your soul is the part of you that is just excited. that motivates you? I give a class once a week at a laboratory in the neighborhood, in our neighborhood, National Laboratory. It's a laboratory where they do a lot of research for weapons and for defense, for the military. A lot of scientists, a ton of Jewish scientists. The laboratory itself has 8,000 employees. So it's like its own compound, it's its own city, and it's maximum security. You have to have a badge, and there's a soldier there with a machine gun checking you in. And I had the wonderful privilege, I have the wonderful privilege to go there once a week and connect with some of the Jewish employees. And I've been meeting Jewish employees from very diverse backgrounds. And there's this one fellow, he's one of the oldest employees at the labs. He's probably in his 90s. And he started getting involved in his Judaism coming through this class for the first time in about 80 years. He grew up in Texas and went to a Jewish school, went to Cheder, didn't like it, ran away, rebelled, ended up marrying out of the faith. And now for the first time in about 75, 80 years, he's kind of reconnecting. And he says to me, he lives in our area, which is not very vibrant. It's not a very vibrant Jewish community. And he says, Rabbi Josh, I have a question for you. How's Judaism doing in America? He's checking in. How's Judaism doing in America? I said, what do you mean? How many people are rekindling their passion? How many people are leaving the fold? I said, I don't have any data for you. But what I could tell you is that it's more accessible than it ever has been. The ability to release that tension, relieve that tension, and learn about our soul is more accessible than it ever has been in the history of creation, the history of Judaism. And he says to me, why? I said, what do you mean? So why would anybody want it? Why would anybody want to do this? I said, I don't know. It's a good question. In some cases, it's easier just to drop the soul and just do what's comfortable, right? If you're and I gave an example, I said, if you're a student in Columbia University with all the anti-Semitism that's going on now, isn't it easier just to drop your Judaism and just do you? I said, you can't. It just doesn't work. The soul has stability to it. And I said, what you're describing right now, what you're asking is the language I use to describe the soul, which he found to be very meaningful. Just this morning, I want to share with you one last insight on the soul, because to me, I wasn't, this wasn't scripted, but I found it to be very meaningful, and I think you will as well. I want to share with you one of my favorite books. It's in Hebrew, but they have English things. It's called the Igros Kodesh. It's the personal responsa from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Again, I'm not here to preach to you or sell you books and sell you Judaism right now. That's not the point here. But I do like to give away trade secrets once in a while. The Rebbe responds to people's real personal issues. It's real. Very often you can learn ideas in the Torah and it's philosophy and you have to apply it to reality. But over here, the Rebbe is addressing real problems that people are having. And this young lady, writes to the Rebbe that she's feeling lonely in life. She wasn't yet married, which was a challenge for her. And she's feeling very lonely. And the Rebbe's reply to her was, you know that you have a soul, which means you know you have a beautiful relationship with God. You might not experience it all the time, right? And the Rebbe says, as a result of that, you know that you have a beautiful relationship, or at least the potential to have a beautiful relationship with people. Because that's what, if we felt at ease with ourselves, if we felt most comfortable with our ideal self, that soul, and that weight was lifted, it's going to get out of the way of our relationships. It's not going to gum up our relationships. You know you have that within you. You know that with that comes a sense of purpose and meaning, right? These are some of the descriptions we had read before, right? That with that comes a sense of purpose and meaning and a calling to life. You know that you have that within you. So why are you lonely? Why are you lost? Why are you by yourself? Then the Rebbe says to her, you know why? Because you're not a tzaddik. So you have this within you, but you're not aware of it. And that's not your fault, right? I'm not saying the expectation is to be a tzaddik. The expectation is to be perfectly aligned 100% of the time. We can't always do that. But then the Rebbe told her, do me a favor and just think about this a little bit. And he uses the word, I'll say it in Hebrew and then I'll translate his boinenus kala, light thinking. You don't have to go that deep. Think about this just lightly. And you'll realize, well, if I have an ideal self that is at ease and that has meaning and purpose and mission, and occasionally I'm doing things that are aligned with that meaning and purpose and mission. I'm just emotionally, there's a little bit of a gap, but behaviorally, I'm there. Think about that. And you'll start to become more comfortable with that soul. Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson writes in his talks, by the way, his talks are beautiful because a lot of anecdotes and stories and reminiscing about what Jewish life was like in the shtetl. It's just interesting history. And he writes how Hasidim used to wear their talis and tefillin on before davening, and a few minutes on their own, unscripted, without not on a webinar, not on a, this is going back several generations ago. They would sit with their talis and tefillin on. They'd close their eyes. They would sing a nigun. They would sing a song, a heartfelt song that was meaningful to them. It wasn't a group thing. It wasn't like, okay, this is the nigun we're singing. This is the song we're singing. It was just them. They'd close their eyes and they would sing for a few minutes. If you try this, do me a favor, guys. Put on your talis and tefillin tomorrow morning and sing a nigun that talks to you. And think about the soul. Think about the clarity, the purpose, the meaning, the mission. Because if you do that, you're slowly getting our heart to buy in. Our heart in our, we're slowly getting to the moon to reflect the sun's light, our heart to reflect the soul's light. We're going to feel it, even for those few minutes. Maybe it won't last the whole day, but try it. It's incredible. It's a good feeling. And sometimes we're busy and we don't have time, and I get it, but do yourself a favor. It's beautiful. That's the recalibration. I want to share with you two practical methods where I think we can help recalibrate our souls. And I'm going to ask you both I'm going to ask you guys two more questions. We know now we don't like this tension. We know what it would feel like if this tension were to be released. So I want you to, again, you woke up tomorrow morning, the tension's gone. I'm feeling like I'm aligned. I'm feeling like my heart's in the place where I want it to be. And because of that, I'm nicer to my kids. Because of that, I'm more respectful to my wife. I'm a pleasure to be around at work. I'm just more easygoing. I feel better about myself. I feel more confident. If I was going through this, what would I be doing differently? What is the first thing I notice about my behavior? What would I do differently? You're welcome to share this if you'd like, but if you felt more aligned, what would you do differently? Just thinking forward. This is forward thinking. If I was in that space, I sang the nigun, and I did somehow manage to align myself. I don't know how I did it, but I did it. What would I do differently? How would I act differently? Treat others with more respect. I'd walk around more confidently. By the way, I want you to know, I didn't make up this question. I actually got it from the Tanya. I'm sorry. You know what they say when if you steal something from one person, it's plagiarism. But if you steal from a lot of people, it's research. So this wasn't plagiarism, it was research. The Tanya says, I'm trying to love God. I'm trying to get myself to this place where I don't have this tension, where my heart is really where I want it to be. And I'm flopping because I'm not there. And I've even gone through some of the meditations, and I've learned about what that soul means in a language that is meaningful to me, not just cliche lingo. And he says, do yourself a favor. I'm paraphrasing here. If you did feel that love, what would you do differently? If you felt that love, what would you do differently? We have to dream big. Dream about that love. What would I be doing differently? Align ourselves with our most preferred self. Align ourselves with our ideal self. That's Mashiach lenses, right? If everything was perfect, how would I feel and how would I act? Can't always control how I feel, but I can control how I act. And I'll slowly through behaviorally, I will recalibrate. And this is true psychologically as well in the paradigm of psychology, because at the moment you change your behavior, you change your whole life cycle. Our life is in cycles, circles. And the moment we do something differently, it's not a circle anymore. We stepped aside. Now it's a spiral. We could go somewhere else. We could go somewhere differently. So if you have your ideal self, your peaceful self, the self that is more connected and more relationally peaceful, and if you could think of, I want you to think of one thing you can do, and you don't have to share it, but think of one thing you can do differently to align yourself with your ideal self. Think of one thing you can do to align yourself with your ideal self. Because what I'm asserting over here and suggesting is that you're not going to just more tension. Now I got to do more things that I don't actually, you're actually going to get yourself there behaviorally. Think of one thing. I'm going to give you 10 seconds just to think of one thing. You don't have to share it. It can be private, but think of one thing you can do differently to get yourself closer to your ideal self. It might be respecting your alarm in the morning, right? It might mean I just saw something great on, I think it was on LinkedIn. Somebody said, life hack, set an alarm for when to go to sleep, not for when to wake up. I thought that was brilliant, right? It might mean focus more on my relationships. It might mean focus more intently on prayer and who I'm talking to for a couple of minutes. I don't know. It might, but something that you feel is going to get you to where you want to be, because that behavioral shift is going to break the cycle and get you to spiral rather than cycle. Cycles is just repetitive and life gets monotonous, life gets boring, and then we end up hating it. But the moment we do something differently, we step aside, again, it's no longer a cycle, it's a spiral. But I want to share with you one more thing. Okay, you have your ideal self. I'm going back to some of our descriptions. Our ideal self means I'm at peace with myself, right? If I woke up in the morning, if things were different, I'd treat others more respectfully, I'd walk around more confidently, I'd have a weight lifted off of me. I want you to take a moment and think about that time you were most closest to your ideal self. Take a moment and think about that time you were recently closest to your ideal self. The ideal self that you want, which is being peaceful, being more connected. Think about the most recent time. No, it's been too long. That's okay. That's okay. It could have been a while ago. Just think. Think about that time you were closest to your most ideal self. When were you most calm, most empathetic? And again, I'm just giving examples that might resonate. When were you most at ease? When were you most respectful to the people around you, or most sensitive to the people around you, right? That ideal self, that soul that we want to connect to. When were you there? You might not have the answer right now. It might take a little bit deeper thinking than what a webinar can allow for. But if you take that for homework, you got the answer. What I'm trying to show you is that because you have that soul, you also have the answer within you. You've been there before. You've had moments of success before. And if you believe me that you have moments of success before, you'll find those moments of success and you'll be able to repeat them. Repeat what worked in the past. Something worked in the past. You're still here, right? Something worked in the past. You know how I know? Because you want to grow, which means you know what growth looks like. You guys were dreaming about incredible, incredible futures, which means you know what it feels like. I want you to just take a moment and think about the past, where you were most successful in the past, feeling that goal. And I'm going to conclude with a story. This is one of my favorite stories. About 10 years ago, I was working at a yeshiva in Florida. That's when I met Yehuda, but he doesn't remember me. No offense taken. No, okay. I was working at a yeshiva in Florida for Bali Tshuva for people that were exploring their Jewish roots, many for the first time ever. And there was a young fellow. He was 24 years old, and he had just discovered he was Jewish 6 months prior. He was raised as a Christian. He he did not appreciate Christianity. He had too good of a relationship with God to appreciate Christianity. He left Christianity at the age of 13. He grew up in Los Angeles. He was part of a Mexican gang. He's been around the block. He's been around town. He's seen all sorts of stuff that we hope our children never have to see and that most of us probably have never seen. He's really been around. At 18, he decided to leave the gang. He moves to Las Vegas, gets his life in order, and living his life as a passionate, just a believer. His mother was ill. Unfortunately, she was adopted as well. And because she was ill and thought her time was coming to an end, and thank God it wasn't, the adoption agency decided to share with her a large packet of her genealogy. And she's looking through it, and her mother's Jewish. Her grandfather was a rabbi in Chicago. Her grandparents were, she comes from a long lineage of Jewish people. So she calls her son and says, I think we're Jewish. And he's never met a Jew in his life. He says, what do you mean? We don't have side curls and we don't have, we've never been to Israel. His only knowledge of Judaism was like CNN once in a while, which is not a good not a good portrayal of Judaism, right? She ends up connecting with a rabbi, happened to be a Chabad rabbi, and she ends up connecting her son, sorry, with a rabbi in Vegas. And there's a lot more to the story, but I'm going to just cut to the chase for the purpose of this conversation. I meet him. The rabbi in Vegas, sorry, takes upon himself to study with this person. At some point, he says, you should go to yeshiva. He says, great, what's that? And he ends up going to yeshiva. And to him, everything was new. Everything was a culture shock. Like, why are you wearing those boxes on your head? Why are you pulling a scroll out of the ark? Why are you putting your hands in front of fire Saturday night, right? The Havdalah. Why are you praying to a cup of wine? And everything was a challenge. Everything was a fight. But once he bought in, he was in. After 6 months of yeshiva, he was really passionate and excited. He ended up going on birthright, went to Israel, made Aliyah, ends up getting married. And he's living in the Holy Land. And he's working in Tel Aviv. He shows up to work at some sort of cybersecurity company or something to that effect. He's in Tel Aviv. And again, he grew up in a Mexican gang. So he has an exquisite, stellar vocabulary, if you know what I mean. He's covered in tattoos. At the same time, he's wearing a yarmulke and tzitzis. So there's this, I hate to label people, but just for the sake of the story, quote unquote, secular Tel Aviv Israeli person looking him up and down and can't figure him out. There's plenty of people with tattoos in Tel Aviv. There's plenty of people with kippahs in Jerusalem. But what is going on here? Why he has both. So he says to him, what is going on here? Are you religious? He says, no. You're not religious. No. Why are you wearing a kippah and tzitzis? He says, I also celebrate Shabbos and I keep kosher and I pray, I study. He says, why would you do all of these things? Why would you have to do all these things if you're not religious? He says, I don't have to do this. I get to do this because I'm in love with God. His heart and mind were aligned, and that in those areas at least. And there was no tension. It was like, this is just who I am, right? There's a certain confidence that comes with it. When we have that alignment, there's a certain, we don't need the validation of other people. The guy was like, wow, can we put on tefillin together? That's what he says. The guy goes to his car, they put on tefillin together. I haven't been in touch with this fellow in many, probably 6 years, with the exception of once last year for about 5-10 minutes. I was giving a series on YouTube on the Parsha, and I shared this story on the YouTube class with unidentifying information and with far less details that I have shared with you even now. Just, I didn't want anybody, I wanted to he wouldn't mind me sharing this story, by the way, but and he'd be proud because he knows it will inspire other people. But I shared just a couple of lines, and a couple of years later, my buddy, this guy, is going through a midlife crisis, unfortunately. He's going through a very difficult time. And I get a call from him a day after I posted this video. I get a text, sorry, can we talk? I'm like, oh, it's been a while. Not realizing I just put a video about him. um, be careful what you tell the rabbi because you're going to be the next sermon. No, I'm kidding. No, we always respect people's privacy. We're on the phone and he says, I'm going through a midlife crisis. I'm going through a very difficult time. And I've fallen emotionally. I'm crushed. Spiritually, I'm going through a hard time. My confidence is gone and everything is, I don't know what happened to me. I was never like this. I've never been like this. He says, I don't know what to do. So I just open my computer and I'm on YouTube and I see your video pop up. And by the way, I'm no Mr. Beast. It's not like you're bound to see my video. Not yet, right? He says, I'm watching the video and I see that you're talking about me. You quoted, I just quoted that one line. I said, I had a friend who used to say that I'm not religious, I'm in love with God. He says, you quoted that one line. He says, I knew you were talking about me. And I just want to thank you because you reminded me where I used to be and you reminded me where I could be. And what I hope is that we can take a moment and have the courage to think about where we used to be because we had moments of success. Think about where we could be and use those tools to bridge the gap. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it.